Okay,
Awesome.
okay, and we're recording. All right. Hello, everyone. Allow me to formally welcome you all to the Plotters versus Pantsers panel. And this is Story Valley's first official, I say official, um, story writing conference. So thanks for being here, and allow me to thank you all for your attention span and graciousness. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Delvius. I don't go too much onto the server these days because I'm busy with thesis. I hope to be finished with that very soon. And I would like for the panelists to introduce themselves one by one because this is the first time I'm also meeting someone.
So hi, I'm Amber Scott, and you probably know me as Blue on the server, so you can call me by either. I will answer. And I am the pure. I'm a pantser, and so I'm very excited to be here and do battle. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do battle. I'll be nice.
Uh-huh. All right. Shall I ask Stephen to introduce himself next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Stephen. I write under the pen name Stephen Rudy. I've written 3 books in my fantasy series, the Luminance Saga.
Hmm.
And I am a plotter, I guess. I was, when I was younger, I was definitely a pantser. But
Uh-huh.
back then, I don't think those terms really existed, actually. So,
What terms were they before, if you don't mind us asking?
honestly, I remember in school that pantsing didn't really have a term. It was almost considered like you
Heresy.
weren't really yeah, exactly. You weren't really a writer, which actually caused problems for me.
Yeah, because that would disqualify Stephen King as a writer.
That's exactly. So, right, there was definitely an emphasis on being able to plot and outline before you write, which I really struggled with. But now I've changed.
Okay, now you've changed for the better or for the worse?
Well, for the better, because I actually complete things now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that all pantsers will agree is a difficulty for them, the completing things. But we'll get into that discussion later as we talk about what plotting and pantsing actually are. So yeah, thanks, Stephen. Who would like to go next as far as introducing themselves?
I am Sam. All of you probably know me as the mod who always writes too much and the one who gets attacked a lot. So I am a plotter. Although I pants when I'm writing stories that will never see the light of day. So like I will be quiet. What is it? Sorry, she made a comment. I'm like, so yeah, I'm a plotter. And I do prefer because I'm a person that likes structure. I like to know where I'm going. If I'm pantsing, I don't like improvising too much because I can tell you the story will just derail very quickly for me anyway. So yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. We have 2 more panelists, I believe. Who would like to go next?
Hi, I am Elle. Y'all would know me as Annie Cupcake. I am actually a planster, so I'm kind of the counterbalance between the two. I'm not a strict plotter, but I do have some structure to how I work.
You're an impersonator, is what you are. You don't belong to any camp. You're not one of us. No, anyway. All right. Thank you.
And
yeah. Anything
and I'm
else?
Rebecca.
Oh yeah. Hi, Rebecca. Okay.
Am I okay to go now?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Rebecca. I'm Arena on the forums or Discord, and I'm a pantser. I can go into more of the reason for why and why plotting is something I've tried that just hasn't worked out for me as we get into it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So with introductions out of the way, I suppose we can actually just get straight into it. So we're basically going to discuss here what plotting and pantsing actually are, what the differences are between them, and how they can also be kind of similar. And then we can discuss a bit about why one works for some people and why the other doesn't, and all of that good stuff. So I would like to go to the panelists now and ask you guys, for your definition, whichever side of the coin you fall on, what is your definition of plotting or pantsing? Um, Steven, you go first, my dude.
My definition for it. I guess pantsing to me, since I've done it before, is kind of, this improvising and writing and letting it take you where your where your mind will take you. But for me, the plotting part, which is what I do now, is it's more, I guess the way I see it is more like just having organization, having a plan before I start to write anything.
Right.
It's not necessarily like all about the plot per se. I know that there's other terms like architect versus gardener, but I'm actually an architect for my profession, and I actually don't think that applies to the at all.
Okay.
But so it's, for me, plotting as a plotter, it just means having this plan, having a structure, having an outline, but that doesn't mean it's totally
Immutable.
strict.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And you said before that you didn't really have a definition of what pantsing was before. So, what's your understanding of what pantsing is?
Well, maybe by by its very nature, maybe pantsing can't have a definition.
All right, the cop out answer. All
Exactly.
right, great. The cop out. All right, I see how it is. I'll remember this. Okay. Well, all right. Thank you. Now, so Stephen was a planner. So I guess now I'd like to hear from one of the pantsers. My brethren, what is your definition of pantsing?
I can go. Well, plotting obviously, to me is like you have your outline, you have your plan, and you have a direction you want to go, and you've made your organizing. Some people do storyboards and stuff. With me, I am very much a true pantser because I'm like, plot, what plot? I don't know any plot. So I will literally go into it, starting at page 1, no idea what I'm going to write, and I usually have no idea about the ending, no idea about the middle.
Not even the ending, because usually sorry.
I'm basically what you call a discovery writer, so I discover things as I go along. So I learn about my characters as I go, and their arcs and stuff, and how they react to the world. I just basically just literally sit down and write and figure things out, and it horrifies a lot of plotters because I'm just so maybe slightly chaotic with this, but it works for me. So
yeah, okay, all right, thank you. So would anyone else like to give their definition of plotters versus pantsers? I think at this point we have a decent idea of what plotting and pantsing are. But would anyone else like to give their 2 cents?
I would just say that as a pantser, I don't feel like it has to be like completely without structure or a goal in mind, but I have a lot of trouble focusing on the bigger picture, or when I try to write something, I do much better when I'm looking at it just at that surface level. What happens next? What logically follows from this? I'll probably still have a goal in mind. Like, I want to get to this ending, but I
Mhm.
don't know all the twists and turns the plot is going to take along the way.
Mhm.
Yeah, true.
Okay, thank you. So anyone else? Because I think at this point, yeah, we have a pretty good grasp on what things are. So I guess I'll just quickly. Sorry, was someone speaking there? No. Okay.
Oh,
So I
mhm.
will just quickly ask the people in the audience. Um, would you guys say, you can just say plotter or pantser. Would you guys, which category would you guys put yourselves under? Would you say plotter or pantser?
You can pop it in the chat box as well. So,
Yeah, you can pop it in the chat box as well if you don't want to speak.
Uh, Despite my best judgment, I usually just end up as a pantser.
Uh-huh. Despite your best judgment. All right. So we have one pantser
Um,
then. Self-identifies.
um,
Uh,
there are no wrong answers here. We will not, roast
well,
you over the coals for giving
I will.
the, for saying
Fun.
you're okay. Well, you're, rude, but that's fine. We love you anyway.
But yeah, all right, that's cool. So far we have one pantser. Anyone wants to chime in as a planner?
There's another pantser on. She said, I think Linda Scott. She says she pantsers the first half of the novel,
Uh-huh.
then fixes all her disasters by plotting.
Okay,
I
cool.
thought,
All right. So thanks, guys. The reason I'm asking is because usually when people identify as either a plotter, sorry, or a pantser, it isn't usually a permanent identification. Eventually, some people, for example, me, we do actually tend to switch between the two as our writing journey progresses. So you might find that when you're starting out writing, plotting can be very intimidating. So you don't plot, you just write. But I think as time goes on, when the need to finish the novel actually arises, oh, right, I'm a writer, I have to actually produce stuff. We eventually move from one end of the spectrum to the other. And now, with that said, what we can actually talk about now is actually the second point, so where we'll dive into each of plotting and pantsing more in depth. So my second question for you, the panelists, is actually with regards to plotting methods. So what are your methods for plotting? Like, what's your strategy that you found has best helped you actually complete a novel? Do you have any suggestions for people who
oh,
may want to go down this route?
oh Lord. I think for me, it really depends on on the individual. For me, so my structure is very weird. So I start off with a huge plan. Starting off, I do the blurb first, and people are like, oh, why do you do the blurb first? But we know the story. The blurb if I know what the blurb is, it kind of gives me an idea of where the story, the tone, and kind of like the aesthetic I want the story to go for. Then I
Mm,
break down the characters. And depending on how much energy I have, I'll actually go in detail of the characters' stories before the story even began. So
mhm,
everything they've done before, even stuff that they had not been able to, even stuff that you won't see, because then it kind of like it feel when you present the stories when the characters are introduced for the first time, you can add elements of it can basically feel like the characters have lived their lives before the story began. And then it will go from the settings, it will go from detailed settings, like specific settings I want, the history of that setting and all that. And
mhm,
then depending on if it's like a fantastical story, I'll end up going through a magic system before I end up writing an act structure, which I think is like usually it's usually a 1.5 page document. I'll write like a paragraph of what happens in each act. And then depending again on how much energy I have, I'll end up breaking down what is it with each chapter and every single what is it act, usually
mhm,
not really, see, not every single act, but usually the first act. If I have what the first act sounds like or looks like chapter wise, then it's easier for me to kind of like what is it do the second act a bit more without necessarily being very strict to a plan, because as
mhm,
long as I maintain the spirit of the story and the structure, I'm fine with improvising a little bit because characters will end up revealing aspects of themselves to you, even if you
Mm,
plan your story to detail. Like you could
right.
write and then automatically be like, oh, I didn't know you guys are taking this way. And it's actually a better direction than you'd initially planned. And so once that happens, you can kind of explore that section, but at the same time, still the characters still can fall in line with the spirit and skeleton of your story.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sim. As a non-plotter, that some of that is new to me because I, I, I guess I just didn't consider any of it. But that is very helpful. Thank you. So, any
I
other plot? Hi. Yes. Yeah. Please
Hi.
kindly give us your
um
insights with regards to plotting.
I start, so since I'm not a strict plotter, I'm a, kind of in between. I start with an overarching idea. Typically, I have at least one of the characters planned out somewhat and one or
Uh
two
huh.
plot points. And then I will write what I call my draft zero. So I will write down, as much of the story as go along, uh, write down, as much as I need to get a better idea of what I want the plot to be. And then I go back and make a more strict outline, and
Hmm.
I just kind of repeat and revise and adjust from there.
Hmm. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
I think my method is pretty similar to that.
Yeah, because I mean, there are only so many ways you can try to organize something, right? Eventually, some of it is gonna be not the same, not the same, but kind of similar to others, and that's
Yeah.
just how it goes, really. But yeah, thank you. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, I was going to say that, as someone who was a pantser and turned to a plotter, part of it was kind of a necessity because I would have like the entire book or story in my head, and it was like I
Mhm.
can't write it that fast.
Right.
So I need to get it out somehow. So it's for me, it's like it can be just in a notebook, and I just start writing ideas and
Mm,
scenes, and they're not always scenes. Sometimes they're just moments. Like I can just
mm,
see it and think, okay, this moment happens, and I'll just put it on a piece of paper and think, okay, I don't know where that goes. And then kind of the more I think through, the more my outline, I guess, comes together. But the outline ends up being kind of more like I know how long the book is supposed to be. So, and I know how many words per chapter roughly I'm going to use. So sometimes I'll just put like a chapter list of 1 to 30 or 1 to 40, and then I would think about structure, about what kind of plot structure is it. Is it 3 acts? Although I almost never write 3 act.
uh-huh.
But anyways, then I can kind of piece together. Okay, I know where it begins, I know where it ends, and then sometimes my outline is more like one word for the scene, and that's it. It's just one word that represents what I think might happen in that scene, but it doesn't go so much beyond that. But at least I have something. So then when I'm
Right.
writing, the actual writing process of it is always pantsing. Like I don't then outline my chapter. Like I don't keep going down and down in the planning portion of it. It's have some kind of direction, a structure to it, and know where I want to go, and then let myself write. And then whatever changes, because inevitably something happens while you're writing,
Yep.
and you get more ideas, and you say, "Oh, okay, this is really interesting. This is what I'm going to do." And then it's nice because you have the structure available, and you can say, "Okay, what's interesting, I know how that affects everything else that goes along." And there's not like you don't adhere so strictly to it that you're bogged down by it.
Yep. Yep. Admittedly, I myself am in the process of transitioning from. I was a strict answer before. Now I'm a hybrid, similar to what you're doing or what you just described, actually. So I think there's a happy medium between plotting and pantsing that uh, I personally believe is the best approach, and maybe some people over time, as they go through their journey, they might feel the same way. But it depends on everyone. Um, okay, um, thank you for that. Would anyone else like to discuss plotting and how it has immeasurably improved their quality of life and enabled them? No, anyone? Okay. At this juncture, then, I would like to ask you guys one more follow-up question that's related to plotting, which is how are you able to actually ensure that what you're doing is plotting and not just straight up obsession with building a world? Because I think this is something that some people pitfall into, which is they create all these plans, they make all of these details, but then they don't actually get around to actually fully writing the story. They create so much background lore, but then they don't actually write it. So, have you ever fallen into that? And if so, how did you overcome it?
No. So when I plot, I always have to have an act structure to tell me the
Uh-huh.
direction of where the story is going. So as long as I have that, and I feel like if I can imagine the story without the enough of the story going forward, without that much plan, enough of the story going forward, then I'll start to write.
Hmm.
So if I have like the first act secured, it's pretty at that point. Yeah, I don't have. I just jump straight into it.
Nice.
So it's more like if I can get that first half or the first third, or the outline of the structure itself, then details like other parts of world building can be added in throughout the drafting process, because then there was stuff I want to change, like stuff I initially thought I wanted. Then when I start writing it, I'm like, maybe this doesn't work. So I end up having to change bits and pieces. So
Right.
yeah, no, it's the moment. It's the moment if I have. It's once I have an outline and a clear vision of how the first act will go, then I'll just go straight into it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Because that's a pitfall that I'm falling into right now. Sometimes I think too much about all the details, but I don't actually write anything. All right. Okay. Um, so I think at this juncture, we've heard quite a good deal about plotting, um, which is the more organized cousin to the next thing we're going to discuss, which is pantsing or pantsing. So to the pantser panelists, I would now like you to discuss what pantsing means to you and how you've managed to make it work for you, and what strategies you've implemented to be able to try to make it work for you. So, Blue.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. So I um probably one of the more extreme sort of answers, because I've been told that apparently, because I rarely make notes. I
Uh-huh.
keep it all stuck in my head. So but generally what I do when I come up with a story idea, and I usually start with some sort of scene that I want to do. Like for example, my race novel is my immortal animal shapeshifters. So I basically came up with that concept first.
Hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, I have an immortal animal shapeshifter. What's he going to be like? So then I thought about his characters. I wanted to be chaotic, I want like what rules does he have basically. So for example, for me, I didn't want a shapeshifter um that were like most shapeshifters that you read about, they have some sort of they have tough shape shifting, or like or they end up naked or something like that. And I
Uh-huh.
didn't want to do any of that. So I basically started out with an idea, and then just kind of slowly started fleshing out the idea, and then I sat down and just started writing something.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I just started writing something, and then kind of
Write
figure
something.
out my plot as I go along. So, but I'm also, as I'm writing, it's always like, what if this happens? What if that happens? So that's kind of where I am kind of extreme about, because a lot of the time I may not necessarily know my ending where I want to stop the story, but I try to be good and imagine usually once in about about a quarter of the way in, then I might think, okay, I know where I'm going. I know where I want the story to end. So then do have that goal in mind to write to the end. So that often helps. But I usually, my editor has been very good and patient and kind and trying to get me to at least make some notes. So I have been doing that a little bit more lately to make sure that I have a general idea of the overall plot, which is probably a good thing. So, but that is
Okay.
usually how I, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, are there any other panelists here who identify as Pansters?
Yeah, you want to go?
I can talk a little bit about my process. I've kind of accepted that I'm going to have what looks a lot like a false start, but I've
False
come
start.
to see this is part of my process, which is maybe I'll write 3 or 4 chapters where I'm getting to know the characters, getting to know the world, because I have a real hard time visualizing that when I'm not at the story level writing it. And then once I've written those chapters, I can kind of see, oh, this is what the story wants to be. And those chapters may not end up in the finished product, but they were part of the process for creating the story and figuring it out. So I don't know if that almost makes it a kind of planning, just a planning by the seat of my pants. I'm
I
hearing
do
a
the
lot
same thing, really. So yeah, I do that too.
I'm hearing a lot of things that's like with the plotters, like we're not so different, you and I.
We are not so
Really.
different. Yeah. Okay. So what was that it? Sorry, or I hope I didn't
I
interrupt
think
you.
that's it for that question. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Would any other Pantser panelists, or if there are, like to wait? We had 3. No, there are no Pantser panelists, are there? There are no more.
I'm kind of in the middle. I
Okay.
think it's more of almost a spectrum from no, just the barest amount of structure all the way up to super detailed structure. It's not a clear delineation where, oh, I'm a plotter, so I have everything, I follow this strict rule as far as how much structure I have and such.
Right.
Or, oh, I'm a pantser, so I don't, do any plotting whatsoever. It very much is which end of the spectrum do you fall towards?
Okay. Thank you. Excuse me. So between plotting and pantsing, which one would you say you use in a more typical fashion as you write? Or would you say that you just do a hybrid approach, like you said? But how does that look like for you?
For me,
In terms of your actual process? Yes.
It really, I do it on a story by story case. So my current work in progress, I'm on like my 3rd or 4th draft of it. So I'm at the point where I am going in and outlining the next few chapters, deciding what needs to happen in those and writing those. Whereas I may have a story where I sit down and get 2 chapters in, know where I'm going, and then I outline the whole thing and write it that way.
Right.
It's very much a story by story, what's going to work for this book.
Okay. Thank you. Oops. Wait, sorry. I think my internet hicked out there. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So you take it story by story. But how do you decide at any one particular point which method would be more appropriate for the story?
Usually, like I said, I start with a basic idea and stuff, and then I kind of discovery write. Typically by the probably second chapter, I'll have a good idea of if I'll be able to stop and outline and how much outlining I can do. Or if I need to write the whole thing and then organize.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to touch a bit more on that point, just to reiterate. Okay. So I think that covers all of the panelists. Now, I actually want to take this opportunity. We've basically just discussed how plotting and pantsing can be different as a process, but towards the end, and really in some points as well, we discussed how they can be kind of similar as well. So, and I would like to hear from both plotters and pantsers at this point. Obviously, you're one or the other, or in one of the panelists' case here, both, which is pretty neat. But I'd like to hear from you guys how you feel they're not actually all that different, or how they can actually be useful. Each one can be useful regardless. So, just to get some insight, because, plotters do improvise. They do write whatever comes to their mind at times. And pantsers do plan as well. So they're not completely exclusively different. But yeah, I just want to raise a discussion about how they're kind of similar in the end. So would anyone like to chime in?
I have thought on that. There's a quote, I think it's from Neil Gaiman, and he said the second draft is where you go back and make it look like you knew what you were doing the whole time. And I feel like the difference between plotter and pantser is where that structure comes in. Do you put it in before you do the writing, or do you go back and add it afterwards?
Okay.
But the structure still has to come in.
Right. Okay. Neil Gaiman is a more accomplished writer than I am, for sure. So I'll defer to his advice on that. But what do you guys think? Because he's correct. The structure has to come in at some point. It doesn't have to be at the start, but eventually it has to come over. When do you guys start putting in structure into your stories, regardless of if you're a plotter or a pantser?
Halfway through.
Halfway through? Not at the beginning?
No.
Definitely not at the beginning. I'm
Okay.
about 15 chapters in, and I'm only now finally like going back and trying to stuff some structure in like a sock puppet.
And how is that working out for you? Does it feel unnatural to be putting in structure within the middle? Like, does it mess up what you've written, or?
It feels a little unnatural. I know deep down that I'm essentially going to have to go back and rewrite the entire book at some point, because I have a couple of nice scenes already done, but I really just have to bend them into shape, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm sure it isn't the most efficient way to do it.
Well, I kind of do something similar, so I think I can commiserate with you and say, no, it isn't. It is not the most efficient way to do these things. But it's what we're comfortable with, and I think at the end of the day, writing as a process, I wouldn't necessarily say it has to be fun, because Stephen King even says for him writing is work. He works it like a 9-to-5 job, and in that sense, it probably isn't fun for him, but it's satisfying. And I think ultimately, as long as we can write in the way that satisfies us, we'll be all right.
That's a very nice sentiment.
Yeah. I hope so. I did not just pull that out of my ass, I promise. Okay. And would anyone else like to chime in?
I was just going to say that with the, I think the major difference sometimes with the plotters versus pansters and similarities is that we technically do have an outline, but the plotters tend to do it before they write. We do it after we write. So for myself, I find the most it's very helpful doing what we call a reverse outline. So I am also very visual. So I will literally make a basically when you do a reverse outline, you make notes on you can put it on your Word or you can I do it on notes like note paper and like the your little presentation cards, that kind of thing. That's what I do. I put in notes on every single chapter. So I go back and I read everything and okay, say if I'm using my Rafe characters, I'm like, okay, chapter 1, Rafe did this, chapter 2, Rafe did that, and I know my overall storyline, which in this case is that Rafe and Amy are trying to figure out what is causing the emotional sickness and how they overcome it, basically. So I'm going to make notes. I know the sickness needs to be mentioned in probably most chapters. So I make a note to see which chapters I actually did mention it, and sometimes I don't. And I realize I've gone way off kilter. So I made notes and I plastered them on my wall, and it really takes up the whole wall sometimes. I can visually see then that I have done a good job covering this topic, for example, but maybe I lost the plot somewhere in chapter 12 somewhere because it's nothing there. There's visually nothing there, and I'm like, oh. It also helps me to if I have subplots as well. Like for example, with this one, I have a romance subplot, and so my Rafe and Amy are going to get together as a result of them trying to get through the main plot. So I have to make sure I follow those things through, even though I am thinking about it. But sometimes it's just nice to be able to visually see it. So. I'm making my outline afterwards and making sure everything is, connected and there's no plot holes and all that. And I think it's the time the plotters do that before they start writing. So, but we're doing basically the same thing, just in a different way, kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, anyone else have any input? Okay, because at this point, I would like to raise. Well, we've touched on this throughout the entire discussion, but plotting and pantsing, for as much as we may use one or the other or switch between the two, ultimately they do have their pitfalls as well as their strengths. So at this point, I just want to ask the panelists to briefly discuss, some of the grief perhaps that your chosen or not necessarily chosen in some instances, your chosen method, it has helped you, but it has also probably hindered you in some cases. So what has that looked like when in times when it has hindered you?
My chapter 1 has changed probably 3 or 4 times as far as when I start writing. So with that changing, I've had to rewrite everything.
Okay.
Multiple times.
And has it been very frustrating? Like, how radically different is your, say, first draft of your first chapter to your second draft?
Oh, there are details added in, there are characters added in. My main character, for as much she's going to end up being the same person, I realize she has to start out as, a little bit different because I know this character better and where she's going than the reader does. So I have to kind of get them to that point with her.
Mm-hmm.
It's
excruciating.
You'd almost think you were reading a completely different book if you went and read my first chapter and this one.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Anyone else want to discuss the pitfalls of their chosen method?
I can second that.
Oh Lord.
Uh, okay. Wait, who was that? I didn't see anyone light up.
Who's speaking? I
Oh,
think Rebecca was speaking. Yeah, it was it.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Oh, I
All
was
right.
just going to say I can second feeling like there's effort that goes in that doesn't make it into the final product, and that can feel a lot like wasted effort. I've tried to look at that as just part of the process, part of how I write, part of how I craft a story means that I'm going to have to do that. But it
Yeah.
does sometimes feel like, oh, I wrote 4,000 words and now I can't use any of them.
Yep. Similar to you, Rebecca, I do feel sometimes like because I'm experiencing that right now. I have a whole chapter that people are like, this slows down the story too much. Can you cut it? And I'm like, 6,000 words. But similar to you, I try not to think of it as a waste because ultimately it is part of the process. You know, you're going to remove things and think of it as investing in yourself as a writer, like as your skills. Because okay, yeah, you wasted the words, but now you know you don't
The,
have to write those kinds of words or that kind of chapter
the,
in
the
the
final
future.
product is going to be stronger because you wrote those words, even if they don't
Yeah.
end up in the final book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because even if they don't make it in, um, you now know more about things like, in my case, story
That
pacing. You know, the story, the chapter I wrote, as much as I loved it, they were right. It did slow down the story way too much. So it's like I made the difficult decision to cut it. But I now know things. For example, I want certain character beats to happen at a later point in say the sequel. I now know that this kind of chapter slows down the story dramatically. So when I actually intend to slow down the story, then I will write a chapter like that, and not when I don't actually intend to slow down the story. So yeah, definitely agree that it can feel like a waste, but really it's not. Anything that makes you a better writer and makes the product better is not a waste.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
Um,
you discover
yeah.
things about how, especially if you're working with like a crit group or something like that, people respond to the story or to certain characters.
is true.
In
Yeah.
earlier drafts, I had a lot of people be like, gee, Caden's an asshole. And I'm just like,
Uh-huh.
Caden's not an asshole though. So I had to go and look and see like maybe what was coming across on the page versus what I really wanted to come across,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah, one
Yeah.
of my struggles is very similar to that. Being a plotter is that I have the structure, and when I finally finish, the editing and critiques are tough for me because the whole thing is played out in my head, and I understand it so well, and I'm sure everyone can kind of get this idea. But when someone says they don't understand something or something didn't come across, it confuses me because I
Mm,
understand it so well and it's so structurally in there, and I don't. So it takes like my feedback. I need specifics so I can understand what didn't I do
yeah.
to make it clear enough and to
Yeah.
establish certain things.
Yeah. How dare you not see things exactly the same way I, the creator of the thing, see it?
Right.
Yes. Love my characters the way I love them.
Yeah. Why won't you love them the way I do?
My issue is that sometimes
Mhm.
it's one of the pitfalls of being a pantser is that sometimes you can write yourself into a corner by accident sort of thing because you forgot to carry out your arcs and stuff from other people, other characters, I should say. And like it's been a couple of times where um, I usually do go. I write and like then what happens? And sometimes I'm like, now what? and but I don't have a really clear way of going forward, so I
Mhm.
have to back up a few steps and sometimes just change the way I had started writing something because it wasn't going to work the way I thought it was going to.
Mhm.
So, but it's still helpful because I just learned how not to write this scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and but like the others have said, it's still not wasted words because I feel like every single word you write, you're going to improve yourself. You're going to learn more about your story. And even if you're plotting it out, because you still have to flesh out your characters, your
Mhm,
your story, and all that.
mhm.
And yeah, I also agree with the false start. Sometimes I have had to restart it a few times because
Yeah.
but but I think that's a pretty common problem. But yeah, and just trying to. There's been a few times where and I think it's also a Panster problem too. Most likely is that I start writing a character and then I've forgotten all about him, and I'll go back and reread
Yeah.
things, and I'm like, what's this
I
dude
I
doing here?
I am so guilty of that. Like I started out my writing journey by writing fan fiction. I don't know
Yeah.
how good what I ultimately wrote was, but I was proud of it at the time. I was also proud of writing extremely long stories. We're talking 600,000 words and halfway through the story.
Yes,
One
I
of
And then
know.
you guys have the nerve to come after me for making a draft that was 470k words, and you out here writing stories that are 600,000 words.
Hey,
The hypocrisy in
to,
all of
Sorry,
you. I
go
have
to
to say that.
the.
Hypocrites.
now, Sim, I must tell you, I have never ribbed you for that. So the others are hypocrites, but I'm not.
I'm telling, no, that's not you. That's for everybody here.
Well,
Blue, be quiet.
The
No,
voices in his head tell him that.
But
I have no room to talk about length of stuff because I underwrite. So I'll be
yeah.
like, oh hey, yeah, it's only 50,000 words, but it's done. When
Mhm.
like
Pretty
no,
good. I
it's
mean,
not.
you have a dummy
Your
will probably.
characters are in a blank white room doing who knows what with their bodies.
Okay, all right. I'm not gonna say anything else on that because I'm sure there are people here who are screaming.
I think
Anyway,
underwriting and overwriting is my
No,
fear,
no,
which is why I have a outline.
mm,
listen,
That is true.
the most mine do is, hold hands.
hold hands. Wow.
So
Do they lock
yes.
eyes too? Do they lock eyes? Do they breathe the same air?
um
Ooh, romantic.
they
Mm,
they
Breathe
they
the
I
same
need
share
to
air.
everyone
the
Women
breathe the
bed,
also
but
be
it's
same
like
not a
that.
air.
necessity.
Sounds like you
sharing
need to
air
go to the
molecules.
romance writing panel.
Humana,
Enough
humana.
safe for work
I
then.
I do not
Hello.
write romance.
Okay.
I
The,
just want to
the
play
Um.
this
story I'm working
iPad.
on now is the first one I've ever had any romance in.
Mhm. Okay. Most characters share the same air if in the same
That's what
scene. Well,
I'm
yes,
saying.
See, exactly.
but but do they share the same air intimately?
I mean, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Not if they're astronauts. Okay, fair. All right, fair enough.
You didn't have to get to that.
Okay.
Astronauts are the only ones that are harlots.
Okay. So that by with that, we have actually concluded the main discussion points of this panel. So we are actually now open to questions. So does anyone from the audience have any questions for any of the panelists regarding plotting and pantsing and making it work for you? Really, because there's no right way to write. There are ways to write that are more effective, but you have to discover what they are for yourself. So do any of you have any questions regarding any of this? So yeah, the floor is open. You can type the questions in the chat, or if you want to get on voice chat. What's the meaning of life? Um,
Pizza,
Pizza.
pizza out, please. No, out. No, no, no,
You
no.
make it up
Don't be
as you
putting me in
go
no
along.
existential crisis.
42.
Playing D&D so you can flirt with your friends. That's the meaning of life.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Shit, why didn't I
Um,
think of that?
does
My question.
anybody?
Yeah.
My
Yes.
question is to the other panelists. Um, is there something that about the opposite person, or the opposite camps,
The opposite, Kim.
processes that sort of blow your mind? like, is there something about the Pansters that blow your mind? If you're a plotter, basically, like how or whatever. Is there something like that?
About plotters, like I don't know how you can see where the story is going to go ahead of time that blows my mind when I'm not like on the ground with the characters in the scene. It's so hard for me to visualize where the story is going to go.
Mm,
At least on, I can maybe see like a really big picture level. Like I know my protagonist and my antagonist are going to have a confrontation. I know that the main character, the romantic leads, are going to end up together, but like all the twists and turns I just can't see until I'm in the moment
Yeah,
writing. So I
neither.
don't know how you visualize that when you're not writing.
So you just do it in your head for a very, 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 very long time, and then you end up actually writing the plan out. That's basically my answer to that. You just play, you
Okay.
play it over. You basically make a self movie in your head, and then when you plan it out, it comes to more to life and whatnot.
Right.
But that brings our counter argument. Like, how do you guys, as pantsers, be able to still remain concise when there's so many ways you can take the story depending on your mind, depending on your process? Because, like as Blue said, she's a discovery writer, which means you discover things along the way, and that could be anything. It could be anything. And so just wondering, how do you guys able to still be able to keep be able to tell a concise story without, when the possibility for derailment is very, very high?
That's a draft 2 problem.
That's a draft 2 problem. Crazy. All right. You heard it right here, folks. You can leave now.
I've
Um,
kind of got a. I was going to ask if anybody had any stories about when either the pantsing or the plotting really worked out for them. Because I had a time where my characters were on the run and they're riding in a stagecoach with one other guy, and the other guy's got a newspaper. And then I realize in the newspaper there should be a wanted ad for my characters. And a whole scene came out of that I wasn't planning. It just kind of happened because this one character had a newspaper, and I realized, oh, it makes sense that in the newspaper would be that people would be looking for my characters and would put an ad in the newspaper.
What if he's reading yesterday's newspaper, so he doesn't have the up-to-date stuff?
That's not as interesting for the story.
What if he doesn't know how to read?
That's not as interesting for the story.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I kind of have a story for both of those, like where it worked out and where it didn't. My first book, my fantasy series, I had it somewhat outlined. I hadn't really figured out my process yet, but I had an outline and I was writing it, and I realized partway through, about maybe 3/4 of the way through, that my outline did not work. Because the characters kind of by that point had a life of their own. So I had to, it's kind of a classic fantasy story, but it was one where I was using older character, college level, and they have like mentors, and I got them to this university, and in my outline I had them like going to school, but there's like this major thing going on, and I realized while writing it that at this point that there's no way that could happen. These characters were too involved with trying to save the world or whatever. They were not going to then go to school. Like, they got to the point that they needed to, and that all made sense, but the rest of my book did not make any sense. They just wouldn't do it. So I had to re-outline and figure out, which is, I'm okay with that. I think these roadblocks or these these dead ends are okay for me, because they kind of inspire me to, what else is the story? What's happening? That's kind of the fun part. But then the next one, I went to go write the sequel. I was like, okay, I need to figure out a little bit better so I don't hit these points. But it helps when you have your characters established by the sequel. But I outlined it, and I started out with just words on index cards, just words, and then I just tore them up and then kind of arranged them into a pattern and saw, okay, this is how it should go. And then I'd go to the outline, and I made it strict, and then I could not write anything because when I write, I do discovery write for like, I don't know, 2-3 months just thinking about the book and didn't get anything written on it.
Right.
And then, but what I had that structure in place, and the more I had thought about it for 3 months, the more, I kind of tweaked with it. But then when I went to write it, I actually wrote the second book in maybe 40 days. I mean, it was like a month, maybe a little bit more than a month, and it was way faster than the first book.
Jeez.
Um,
Well, that's some writing speed. I wish that I haven't written that fast since I was a child.
there was a moment right after I had written this really intense battle scene, and one of my characters actually, kind of got knocked out, and I realized this is the perfect moment to have it be both where he realizes, where the other character realizes, and the audience realizes that he's in love with this person. He can't live without them. And so I was able to have a really sweet moment there that I had no plan for.
Yeah.
Was she the nurse? Yeah.
It was the actual, that was also the moment I realized, oh, hey, this is, if not a romantasy, at least fantasy with a heavy romantic subplot.
Okay. Awesome.
I think my favorite one with me, my favorite one is I have with my character Wave, he like I said, he's a shapeshifter, and I have it basically if he's in like a fight or something, he does not tend to change shape. One thing you sort of consider it a little bit cheating kind of thing, and it just doesn't make up. It makes the it makes I don't want him to be too Mary Sue kind of thing, right? So he doesn't do that a lot. But there was this one time where he gets chased and then he gets literally trapped into a corner and there's Warlock coming after him. So I was like, okay, now what? And but I'm like, I can lean into a little bit of him taking the time to change shape. And normally he doesn't. I'm like, what now? How do I get him unstuck? And so my best with Wave, he is fun because I can just say, okay, he's just suddenly going to do this. And it works. So with that one, he got stuck in the corner. The Warlock going after him. He got his magic ready to like kill him or something. And Wave basically changes into a llama and spits on him and gets away that way.
Awesome.
Yay!
So we do have a question here in the chat. So Dominic asked, I'm curious who revised the most between pantsers and plotters. I do plotting for characters, beginning, ending, and then chapter by chapter, but I freeform all the conversations and interactions. I find myself editing a lot of my character outlines after a great conversation and scene happen. Then it changes some focal points in the story. Who revises the most between pantsers and plotters? Oh, that's going to be I think that will ultimately depend on the writer themselves, because you can have a plan, but then like you're a plotter, you plan and then you write it and you realize this is a shit plan, and so you revise it to change the plan. On the other hand, if you're a pantser, you write something and it's a coin flip. Either what comes out is something you like or something you don't like, and then you revise it accordingly. So I would say for that, and I feel like some of us here would agree, who edits more is really ultimately a writer specific matter rather than something between plotters and pantsers.
Yeah, it really is. It depends on the story. Like, yeah, like that you can set up your plot, and maybe you can set it up properly. So you're gonna have to go back and revise the whole thing, and or like just at the pantser, you might have maybe not put enough thought into your characters or your setting or your story. So it really does depend. I don't think either really revises more than the other, to be honest.
Yeah, as a
Mm,
plotter,
okay.
as a plotter, I can say we revise quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like there's
Uh,
you have
s-
to go in and improve scenes and
Yeah.
realize what if a scene's not working and doing what you think it should be doing, you have to go back to that. Sometimes I spend a
No,
ton of time
we're
on
not.
no,
adding
no,
minor
nobody is
details.
safe.
Wait,
Okay,
is
so
it
it
how
is
did
We
wait,
have a
when he gets
question
to
as
the
well.
A3 ride? Oh
hey,
Lord.
really, no one is safe.
Oh
um,
man.
So,
so out of respect for everyone's time, we are just about done, but I think we have time for one more question, which is T's. So T, yeah, if you want to type that question in, we can answer that before we can call it a day. So feel free to type it in. But yeah, nobody is safe from the A3, right?
no,
Neither
unfortunately.
Potter. I mean, if you're really good, if you're a very experienced writer, I suppose like Stephen King level, or
I
or
mean,
someone else.
really,
I mean,
yeah.
there might come a point when you don't have to rewrite as much to get the story you want, but definitely not at the first instance. Do you free write conversation to sit there and bring the comedy? Comedy. So I guess if your intention with the dialogue is to be humorous, now humor has to be intentional. I think from on the part of
Yeah,
the
I think
author.
you have to kind
Um,
of like figure that out. Mhm.
yeah. So
I mean,
um, do I free write? Now I don't try to be funny with most of my dialogue, not intentionally. I try to make a situation funny with dialogue, but I don't try to make the dialogue itself funny. But I guess I do free write most of my conversations simply because I have an idea of how the interaction is supposed to go. This character is mad at this character, they want answers, and then I just kind of go from there. So I do free write it. I don't really plan what the conversation is going to be like. I don't. I think everyone else does things differently, especially with regards to comedy,
No, I
because yeah.
for me, it's who are the characters? What how do they react to things? Like, and some characters are funny,
Mm,
some aren't. So if a conversation's going and I would, I'm free writing, I guess, I'm not sure what that exactly means, but I'm free writing all these conversations. But if the character's going to react, I guess in my head, but they're going to react how they're going to react. And some of them are funny, and some aren't, but some are too serious, or,
mm,
some are mean. And that should be coming out in their dialogue.
uh-huh. Yeah. Exactly. Because humor is humor is its own can of worms. We can talk about what makes something humorous all day
It's also
because there's
very
so many.
subjective.
Yeah, it is. So I think some humor. I mean, there are improv stand-up comedies for a reason, right? Some humor might be better, might be more easy to translate by free writing, whereas some humor has to be much more deliberate and planned. Um, like look at the Charlie Chaplin movie, for example. Like the situations there are very, he's like Mr. Bean, right? But all of that stuff is really planned. You can't do that, otherwise someone would get killed. So there's intention and there's deliberateness and planning to that kind of comedy. But then there's comedy as well that's improvised and it works for its purposes. Um, I
I
tend
think
to
what
free
works
write and
best.
pencil it
I
down.
I think what works best to learn how to write it better, to learn more humor, is to either you know read books and are more humor on the humor side, or do you watch shows and stuff? Like for example, I really liked if you ever watched The Martian kind of thing?
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
he did a really serious situation stuff, but he makes humor to entertaining stuff and just cracks himself up, right? And
Yep.
and to just make the best out of a shitty situation kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that was so a lot of it that was really funny, even though he's in a dire, drastic situation. Um, so it makes the humor part more funny because you're breaking the tension a bit. So,
Mm,
basically watching things like that or reading similar books or it's what makes your humor improve, kind of thing. Does that
yep.
make sense?
I think reading in your desire, reading what you desire to improve at, lots of it is always a sound advice. Like if you want to get better at writing fantasy, read more fantasy. If you want to write
Yeah.
comedy better, then read more comedy or watch comedy. Basically, consume more of that so that you know what works and what doesn't. So yeah, actually, I think that's about time. So I think that actually concludes this session. If anyone else has any questions, these lovely people are are in the Story Valley, server. So feel free to discuss things there with them. But I think this particular panel is done. So thank you to all of the panelists who came. Thank you for sharing your insights with everyone here. I hope that everyone manages to get off this call with a little more something that they can take towards their writing. So yeah, thanks guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
That's
so much
very
for
nice.
coming as well. I'm really happy how everybody was good. We are pretty similar. We did not fight.
I got a dip so I can get to my next panel.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah,
Thank
everyone's
you.
busy.
I'm
Bye.
going to sleep again.
Fine. I'll end the
Okay.
recording here now.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.